The sound of my body hitting the floor at Christmas dinner wasn't the worst part. It was the silence that followed. 23 family members, and not one person helped me up, not even my mother. I'm Simona Cunningham, I'm 29 years old, and until that December night, I thought I knew what rock bottom looked like. Turns out, rock bottom has a basement, and it smells like my stepfather's cologne mixed with pine needles and betrayal. Before I continue, please hit that like button and drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Thank you. Now, let me take you back to Christmas Eve at the Cunningham Morrison annual gathering. You know the type, matching sweaters that nobody actually wants to wear, enough food to feed a small army, and family drama simmering just below the surface like badly seasoned gravy. Frank had been my stepfather for 10 years, but that night he was in rare form. He'd been drinking his special vintage wine since noon, which I happen to know was just Trader Joe's finest poured into a fancy decanter. He kept making these little comments all evening about how I was sitting in premium real estate at the table, about how some people earn their place and others just inherit it. My cousin Jennifer kept shooting me looks that said, "What is his problem tonight?" Then, at exactly 7:47 p.m., I remember because I was staring at the grandfather clock to avoid eye contact, everything changed. The door burst open with that dramatic flair only Brittany could manage, my stepsister arriving 2 hours late, designer shopping bags in hand despite claiming bankruptcy last month. Frank's whole face lit up like she was the second coming. What happened next still plays in slow motion in my mind. Frank stood up, walked over to where I was sitting, the same seat I'd occupied for 29 years, the seat my late father used to call Simona's throne, and announced to everyone that his real daughter needed a proper place at the table. When I didn't move fast enough, he grabbed my chair while I was still in it and yanked. I tried to stand, got tangled in the tablecloth, and went down hard. My hip hit the hardwood floor, my dress ripped, and the cranberry sauce went flying. But the worst part? The silence. 23 people, including my own mother, just sat there like they were watching a dinner theater performance. My grandmother made this tiny gasp, the kind she usually reserves for when someone uses the wrong fork. Uncle Ted, bless his tacky heart, had his phone out and was recording everything, probably thinking it would be funny for his Facebook page. My mother's face had that frozen expression she'd perfected over the years, the one that said she saw nothing, heard nothing, and would say nothing. As I pulled myself up, cranberry sauce staining my grandmother's vintage dress, I heard Frank mutter something about how I should be grateful I was even invited. That's when I noticed it. His business phone, unlocked and face up on the kitchen counter. In my world of corporate compliance, we call that an opportunity. I left that night with my dignity in pieces, but something else intact. My father's old laptop hidden in my car, and photos of every single message on Frank's phone. He thought he'd pushed around a nobody. He was about to learn that sometimes the nobody knows everything. To understand why that push meant everything, you need to know what the previous 10 years looked like. Frank Morrison entered our lives like a knight in shining armor. If armor came from Men's Warehouse and knights drove leased BMWs they couldn't quite afford. My mother had been widowed for 2 years when Frank appeared at our church's Widows and Widowers group. Looking back, him being there was like a wolf attending a sheep support group. He zeroed in on my mother faster than Brittany goes through credit cards. The favoritism started small. Brittany got a car for her 18th birthday, a brand new Honda. When I turned 18, Frank got me a bus pass and a lecture about self-sufficiency. I actually laughed at the time, thinking he was building character. The joke was on me. College was where things got interesting. My father had set up education funds for me before he died. I'd seen the statements when I was younger. But when I went to access them, mysteriously depleted. Market volatility, Frank explained, while somehow finding $60,000 for Brittany's art degree at a private college. She dropped out junior year to become an influencer. Her Instagram has 247 followers, half of them bots. My mother transformed during those years, too. She went from the woman who ran charity galas and commanded respect to Frank's personal echo. Whatever Frank thinks is best became her catchphrase, like she was a pull-string doll programmed with 5 responses. The real knife twist? The family business my father built from nothing, a small but profitable logistics company, was now under Frank's control. He'd convinced my mother to make him CEO while she was still grieving. I watched him parade around my father's office, using his golf clubs, sitting in his chair like he'd earned any of it. But here's what Frank didn't know. I'd been watching more than he realized. 3 years into their marriage, I'd found discrepancies in the company books during a family dinner where he'd left his laptop open. 5 years in, I noticed property transfers that didn't make sense. 7 years in, I started keeping copies of everything. Thanksgiving last year, my grandmother pulled me aside in the kitchen. She pressed something into my hand, a USB drive. "Your father's old laptop," she whispered. "The one from the garage? Don't let Frank know you have it. There are things on there, things he should have told you before he died." Then she went back to basting the turkey like she hadn't just handed me a potential bomb. Frank got bolder as Brittany failed at job after job. First, she was going to be a fashion designer, then a party planner, then a life coach, which was rich, considering she couldn't manage her own life. Each failure cost thousands. And guess where that money came from? The company my father built. The pattern was so clear you could set your watch by it. Brittany would fail. Frank would rage about ungrateful millennials, then somehow find money to fund her next disaster. Meanwhile, I was working 60-hour weeks in corporate compliance, taking night classes for my CPA, and still hearing about how Brittany was the future of the family. Christmas night, I sat in my apartment with ice on my hip and fire in my heart. The champagne I'd brought for the family toast sat unopened on my counter. Turns out humiliation pairs better with coffee and rage. I pulled out my father's old laptop, the one I'd hidden in my closet for a year, too scared to open it, too scared of what I might or might not find. The USB drive my grandmother had given me felt heavy in my hand. Tonight felt like the right time to finally look. The password was my birthday. My father was brilliant but terrible with passwords. What loaded up made my hands shake. Email archives going back 15 years. Folders labeled insurance, will for Simona, and one that made my stomach drop, if something happens. The first discovery hit like ice water. My father's will, the real one, had specific protections I'd never seen. The family business was supposed to be held in trust until I turned 30, with mandatory distributions starting at 25. The house was never supposed to be put in Frank's name. There were safeguards, provisions, clauses that protected everything. So where was this will during probate? I grabbed Frank's phone photos from earlier. Thank God for his narcissism requiring a 15-minute photo shoot with the ham. His text messages told a story better than any Netflix drama. Brittany owed money to people with names like Big Tony and Vegas Mike. The numbers made my eyes water. $200,000, maybe more. Frank had been juggling creditors like a circus act. Then I found the mother lode. Messages between Frank and someone named Carl about restructuring the company assets, moving inventory offshore, setting up shell companies, using the family business as collateral for loans that were funding Brittany's lifestyle. In my line of work, we have a word for this: fraud. My phone buzzed. The family WhatsApp group was going insane. Uncle Ted's video of my fall had been posted with crying, laughing emojis, but the responses weren't what he expected. Cousin Jennifer wrote, "Ted, what the hell is wrong with you?" Aunt Martha added, "This is disgusting." My phone rang. It was Jennifer. She told me something that made everything click. She'd been doing paralegal work for a firm handling foreclosures, and she'd seen our mother's house on a preliminary list. Frank had taken out 3 mortgages without telling anyone. The house my father built with his own hands was about to be lost to pay for Brittany's failed boutique, her failed food truck, her failed everything. I opened my laptop and started typing. Every email I wrote was scheduled to send at 3 a.m. to Frank's business partners, to the IRS tip line, to the state attorney general's office, to Brittany's creditors with Frank's actual financial statements attached, to my mother with the real will. Each email was perfect, professional, and devastating. 10 years of compliance training was about to pay off in ways my company never imagined. I included Uncle Ted's video in several of them. Let them see exactly who Frank Morrison really was. I woke up at 5:58 a.m. on Christmas morning, 2 minutes before my alarm. I made coffee, sat in my father's old reading chair, and waited. At exactly 6:23 a.m., Frank's world began to explode. The first call came from Carl, his business partner. I could hear Frank's phone ringing from my apartment. He lived 3 floors up in the same building, another thing he'd manipulated my mother into paying for. Then another ring, then another. By 6:45 a.m., the calls were continuous. I pulled up the family WhatsApp to watch the show. Frank had typed, "Simona, what did you do?" in all caps at 6:31 a.m. At 6:32 a.m., he tried to delete it, but 17 people had already screenshot it. Uncle Ted suddenly wasn't finding anything funny anymore. His video had somehow made it onto TikTok overnight and had 50,000 views. Quick pause here, friends. If you're enjoying this Karma Christmas special, please hit that subscribe button and leave me a comment. Let me know your worst family dinner story. Your support helps me share these stories, and honestly, it means more than you know. Back to the chaos. Frank's partners were the first dominoes. Carl, Fred, Rick, Andy, Uma, and Derek. I swear I'm not making up those names, though the acronym they spell is almost too perfect. Each received detailed documentation of Frank's creative accounting. The IRS tip included 5 years of discrepancies I documented, with a bow on top. Brittany's creditors got the real treasure, Frank's actual assets, his hidden accounts, and proof that he'd been lying about his finances while his daughter skipped payment after payment. Big Tony, it turns out, doesn't appreciate being played for a fool. My mother's email was different. I included the original will, the real one, plus documentation of every property transfer, every fund withdrawal, every single thing Frank had stolen while she grieved. I ended it with a simple question. Did you know or did you choose not to know? By 7 a.m., Frank was at my door, not pounding, not demanding, whimpering. Through the peephole, I could see him in his Christmas pajamas, phone in each hand, both ringing nonstop. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 30 minutes. Then Brittany's voice echoed through the hallway. She was screaming about her credit cards being declined at Starbucks. On Christmas morning, she'd gone to Starbucks. The entitlement was almost impressive. She was demanding Frank fix it immediately, threatening to tell everyone about his side business if he didn't. Even I didn't know about a side business. This was getting better than expected. My mother arrived at 7:30 a.m., still in her nightgown with a coat thrown over it. The look on her face wasn't anger or sadness. It was awakening, like she'd been sleepwalking for a decade and finally opened her eyes. Frank's phone showed 47 missed calls by 8 a.m. I know because he kept screaming the number like it meant something. Lawyers, creditors, partners, investigators, even Brittany's art school, calling about fraudulent loan applications. Each ring was a nail in the coffin he'd built himself. The family chat had evolved from confusion to commentary. Cousin Jennifer posted, "Karma's working overtime this Christmas." Grandmother simply wrote, "Finally." My mother hadn't said a word online, but she'd been reading every message, seeing every piece of evidence I'd shared. By 9 a.m., 3 news vans were outside our building. Turns out Uncle Ted's video hadn't just gone viral on TikTok. Someone had tagged it, "Evil Stepdad Gets Exposed," and it was trending. Frank pushing me at dinner was playing on loop across social media, each share adding another crack to his reputation. 3 days after Christmas, just when I thought Frank was down for the count, he pulled what I call the reverse victim shuffle, a move so audacious I almost admired it. Almost. I was sitting in my apartment going through the growing pile of legal documents when my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. Not Frank's desperate knocking this time. This was professional. The man at my door looked like a lawyer from Central Casting. Silver hair, expensive suit, and a smile that probably cost more than my car. His name was Richard Steinberg, and he handed me papers with the kind of flourish usually reserved for magicians pulling rabbits from hats. Except this rabbit had teeth. Frank was suing me for $2 million for corporate espionage, defamation, and something called intentional infliction of emotional distress. That last one made me laugh out loud, which probably wasn't the reaction Richard expected. Turns out, Frank had called in a favor from his golf buddy. You know, the one who always cheated at the 9th hole. Richard Steinberg wasn't just any lawyer. He was the guy who'd gotten 3 CEOs off on technicalities. His retainer alone cost more than Frank had, but apparently he was working on contingency, betting on a big payout. The counterattack was actually clever. Frank claimed I'd used my position in corporate compliance to steal trade secrets, that I'd violated confidentiality agreements, and that my malicious prosecution had cost him millions in lost business. He'd even found 2 former co-workers of mine, Kelly and Marcus, both fired for expense fraud, who were willing to swear I'd bragged about taking down my stepfather. But the real shock came at noon. Brittany showed up at my door with a camera crew, not news media. She'd hired a documentary filmmaker, a guy named Chad with a YouTube channel, to film her story of being victimized by a jealous stepsister. She stood in my hallway, fake crying about how I'd always resented her success, how I'd fabricated evidence, how I was the real villain. The narrative was spreading. Frank had hired a PR firm. Well, actually, it was just some guy named Doug who ran a reputation management service from his mom's basement, but he was surprisingly effective. The hashtag falsely accused started trending. They'd edited Uncle Ted's video to make it look like I'd thrown myself down. The internet, it turns out, loves a conspiracy theory. By day 4, I was getting death threats from strangers who'd decided I was an evil stepdaughter trying to destroy a hardworking family man. My company put me on administrative leave pending investigation. My neighbor started a rumor that I was mentally unstable. Even some family members started questioning. Maybe Frank had a point? Maybe I'd gone too far? The worst moment came when my mother called, doubt creeping into her voice. "Simona," she said quietly, "Frank's lawyer showed me documents. They look real. Did you plant evidence?" The fact that she could even ask that question after everything felt like being pushed all over again. Frank went on local morning television, the kind of show that usually covers lost dogs and bake sales. He wore his best suit and what I call his wounded deer expression. He talked about raising me like his own daughter, about the pain of being betrayed, about just wanting our family back together. The host, who'd clearly never fact-checked anything in her life, nodded sympathetically. Meanwhile, Richard Steinberg was good, really good. He'd found a technicality in how I'd accessed Frank's phone. Apparently, looking at an unlocked phone could be considered unauthorized access to electronic devices. He'd turned my documentation into evidence of an obsessive vendetta. He'd even suggested I'd manipulated my elderly grandmother into participating in my scheme. The hearing was set for December 30th. The judge, Harold Feinstein, was known for favoring dramatic reversals. Frank's team had momentum, media sympathy, and a narrative that was starting to stick. That night, I sat with my father's laptop, wondering if I'd played my cards too early, if Frank was about to flip the entire table. December 29th, the day before the hearing, everything changed again. But this time, Frank's carefully constructed counter-narrative collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. It started with Doug, the reputation management expert. Turns out, running a PR campaign from your mom's basement has limitations. Specifically, your mom. Doug's mother, Barbara, recognized Frank from her book club. Not her current book club, the one from 15 years ago in Phoenix, where Frank had gone by the name Francis Morrison Walsh and had scammed 6 widows out of their savings before disappearing. Barbara didn't just call the police. She called her entire network of book clubs across 3 states. By noon, 14 different women had come forward with stories about Frank, different names, Same scam. The wounded family man persona evaporated faster than Brittany's modeling career. Then Kelly and Marcus, my former co-workers who'd agreed to testify against me, had a sudden attack of conscience, prompted by the FBI showing up at their doors. Turns out, lying in a federal investigation is still illegal, even if a fancy lawyer asks you to do it. They flipped faster than pancakes at IHOP, admitting Frank had paid them each $5,000 to lie. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. Richard Steinberg's paralegal, a quiet woman named Dorothy who'd been taking notes in every meeting. She'd been recording everything. Legally, since our state is a one-party consent state. Frank, not knowing this, had been extremely candid about fabricating evidence, bribing witnesses, and his plans to flee to Costa Rica once he got the settlement money. Dorothy didn't just quit. She marched into the DA's office with 6 hours of recordings, color-coded transcripts, and what she called her conscience folder. Every dirty trick Richard and Frank had planned. Turns out Dorothy's daughter had been scammed by a stepfather, too. She'd been waiting for exactly this moment. The documentary filmmaker Chad, who'd been following Brittany around, accidentally became the hero we didn't know we needed. He'd been live-streaming a lot of his footage, thinking it would build buzz. What it actually did was capture Brittany admitting on camera that she knew her father was guilty. But who cares? We need the money. She also mentioned the side business again. Apparently, Frank had been selling fake luxury goods online, using the company warehouse for storage. By evening, Frank was at my door again, not with lawyers or cameras, but alone, desperate, and somehow even more pathetic than before. He actually tried to play the family card. "We can work this out between us, we're family." I recorded the entire conversation on my phone, including the part where he offered me $50,000 to drop everything, then $100,000, then finally, "Whatever you want, just name your price." My mother arrived while Frank was still begging. She'd spent the day with grandmother, going through old photos, old documents, and apparently old recordings. Turns out my father had suspected Frank was a con artist before he died. He'd hired a private investigator, gathered evidence, but the cancer took him before he could act. Mother had found it all in a safety deposit box she'd forgotten about. Grief does strange things to memory. The look on Frank's face when Mother played the recording of him bragging to someone about landing the grieving widow jackpot was almost worth everything. Almost. That night, after Frank had slinked away and Mother had gone home to process everything, I sat alone with my father's laptop. There was one folder I'd been avoiding, labeled simply, "For my daughter, open when ready." I finally felt ready. The first file was a video, my father, thin from chemo but eyes still bright, sitting in his study. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 weeks before he died. His voice was weaker than I remembered, but his words were steel. "Simona, if you're watching this, it means Frank Morrison has shown his true colors. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you myself, but I've left you the tools to protect yourself." He held up a folder. "Everything in here is backed up in 3 places: the laptop, a safety deposit box at First National, and with my attorney, Mitchell Reeves, in Denver." What followed was 20 minutes of my father methodically laying out Frank's history. His real name was Franklin Morris Worthington. He'd been running the same con for 20 years across 7 states. My father had tracked down 11 victims, recorded their stories, gathered police reports. Frank wasn't just a con man. He was a serial predator who specialized in widows with children. But then my father revealed something that made me gasp. I didn't confront him because I needed him to think he'd won. "You see, sweetheart, the FBI has been watching Frank for 5 years. Agent Sarah Chen approached me 6 months ago. We've been building a federal case." The video continued with my father explaining the trap he'd set. The will Frank thought he destroyed? That was fake. The real one was filed in Denver, ironclad and unbreakable. The business accounts Frank had access to. Honeypots with trackers on every transaction. Even the house. It was in an irrevocable trust that would activate on my 30th birthday or upon evidence of Frank's fraud, whichever came first. "I knew I wouldn't be there to activate it," my father said, tears in his eyes, "but I knew my daughter would be strong enough to finish what I started." The next file was labeled Sarah Chen, FBI contact. I I dialed the number with shaking hands. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been waiting for years. "Miss Cunningham? I was wondering when you'd call. Your father said you'd know when the time was right." What followed was a conversation that changed everything. Frank's secretary, the one he'd been having an affair with, she was Agent Chen, undercover for 3 years. She hadn't been having an affair. She'd been documenting everything. The side business selling fake goods? It connected to an international fraud ring the FBI had been tracking for a decade. "We were waiting for Frank to make his big move," Agent Chen explained. "The lawsuit against you, that's it. He's now committed federal wire fraud, witness tampering, and about 15 other felonies. We're moving in tomorrow morning." But my father had left one more surprise. A folder labeled "The Network" contained contact information for all of Frank's previous victims. Over the past week, while I'd been fighting Frank's PR campaign, they'd been organizing. Barbara from the book club had connected them all. They'd formed a victims support group, hired a collective attorney, and were preparing a massive civil suit. The final video file was short, recorded the day before my father entered hospice. He was in my childhood room, sitting on my bed, holding the teddy bear he'd given me when I was 5. "Simona," he said, "I need you to know 3 things. First, I'm proud of who you've become. Second, your mother will need time to heal, but she'll come back to herself. Be patient with her. And third," he smiled, that mischievous smile I'd missed so much. "Frank's biggest mistake was underestimating you. He thinks you're just a sweet compliance officer. He has no idea you got your fighting spirit from both your parents. Give him hell, sweetheart, and then live your beautiful life." The video ended with him placing the teddy bear on my pillow and whispering, "Justice isn't revenge, it's balance. Restore the balance, my darling girl." December 30th arrived with a blizzard and a SWAT team. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. The FBI doesn't believe in sleeping in. Frank was in his underwear. Brittany was screaming about her rights, and somehow, Doug the PR guy was there too, having spent the night crisis managing from Frank's couch. All 3 were arrested, though Doug was released once they realized he was just catastrophically stupid, not criminal. The hearing scheduled for that morning became something else entirely. Judge Feinstein, who'd been ready to hear Frank's lawsuit against me, instead found himself presiding over an emergency asset freeze. The FBI presented their case with the kind of precision that made my compliance-loving heart sing. Agent Chen took the stand. 3 years of undercover work distilled into 2 hours of devastating testimony. She documented everything: the embezzlement, the fraud, the money laundering, even Frank's plans to murder my father by switching his medications, a plan he'd abandoned only because my father was already dying. Richard Steinberg tried to withdraw from the case so fast he actually tripped over his briefcase, but the judge wasn't done with him. Turns out Dorothy the paralegal had recorded Richard knowingly suborning perjury. His law license was suspended before lunch. The victims' network appeared like an avenging army of pearls and sensible shoes. 14 women, all over 60, all telling the same story with different names and dates. Frank had stolen over $3 million over 20 years. The civil suits alone would destroy him, but the criminal charges were what really mattered. The IRS agent who testified actually smiled while reading the charges: tax evasion, tax fraud, filing false returns. The list went on for 20 minutes. Frank owed $1.4 million in back taxes, but with penalties and interest, it was closer to $3 million. They'd frozen everything, even the quarters in his car's cup holder. My mother took the stand to validate the trust documents. She was composed, clear, and when asked about Frank's character, she simply said, "I was grieving. He was hunting." The entire courtroom went silent. But the moment that broke Frank completely was when Brittany took the stand for the prosecution. Faced with her own charges, she'd flipped faster than her failed businesses. She detailed every scam, every lie, every crime she'd witnessed. She even produced recordings she'd made of Frank, insurance for when he inevitably turned on her. The scorpion had stung itself. The federal prosecutor, a woman named Jessica Torres, who looked like she ate defense attorneys for breakfast, laid out the full scope. This wasn't just fraud, it was racketeering. Frank hadn't acted alone. He was part of a network that targeted widows across the country. The fake luxury goods were funding terrorism. The money laundering went through 6 countries. Frank wasn't just facing jail time, he was facing the kind of jail time usually reserved for mob bosses. By the end of the day, Frank had been denied bail as a flight risk. His passport had already been flagged when he'd tried to book a ticket to Costa Rica that morning. Every asset was frozen, every avenue of escape blocked. The man who'd pushed me down was now falling, and unlike me, no one was going to help him up. New Year's Eve arrived with champagne and vindication. The family gathering was at grandmother's house this time. She'd declared the old venue tainted by Frank's presence, and nobody argued with grandmother when she used that tone. The atmosphere was surreal. The same people who'd watched in silence as Frank pushed me were now treating me like a hero. Uncle Ted had become my biggest supporter, mainly because his video had been optioned for a true crime documentary and he was getting paid. He donated half to charity, keeping the rest for what he called his apology fund, taking me to very expensive dinners to make up for being an idiot. Jennifer had proven herself a true cousin through everything. She'd spent the week helping other victims file paperwork, working pro bono because, as she said, watching Frank get destroyed is payment enough. She'd even started dating Agent Chen's partner, a very nice FBI accountant named David who loved spreadsheets as much as she loved justice. My mother arrived early to help set up. She'd been in therapy since December 27th, an intensive program for victims of long-term manipulation. She looked different, not just happier, but present in a way she hadn't been for a decade. She'd started wearing red again, my father's favorite color on her. "I need to apologize properly," she said, not to the room, but directly to me, not for being fooled. Grief makes fools of us all, but for choosing comfort over courage, for letting him dim your light to avoid seeing my own darkness. You deserved a mother who fought for you. Instead, you had to fight for both of us. The room went silent, but it was a different silence than Christmas Eve. This was respect, acknowledgement, the kind of moment that heals things. Grandmother stood up, raising her champagne glass. "This family failed Simona once. We will not fail her again, and we will not forget that justice came not from us, but despite us. May we earn the forgiveness she's showing us by being here tonight." At exactly midnight, as the ball dropped on TV, my phone received a notification. The trust had activated. The family business was officially mine. The house was in my name. Every protection my father had put in place had triggered. It was January 1st. New year, new life, new beginning. Frank, meanwhile, was spending his New Year's Eve in federal detention. Brittany had been released on bail but was under house arrest at a halfway house, her Instagram dreams replaced by court-mandated community service. She'd gotten a job at McDonald's. The uniform did not photograph well. Someone had sent me a photo from the detention center's New Year's celebration. Apparently, they'd had sparkling apple cider and stale cookies. Frank was sitting alone in a corner, wearing orange instead of Armani. The man who'd needed to be the center of attention was now just inmate number 4847329. The best part? The documentary producers wanted to interview me. The working title was Push Down, Standing Up, a Christmas Crime Story. They were offering enough money to restart the scholarship fund my father had created before he died. Frank's downfall would fund other people's dreams. 6 months later, I sat in my father's office, now truly mine, preparing for Frank's sentencing hearing. The federal case had been swift and decisive. Frank had pled guilty to 47 charges, hoping for leniency. He wouldn't get it. The judge, a woman named Patricia Hawkins, who'd been one of my father's clients years ago, didn't hide her disgust. Frank got 25 years federal time, no possibility of parole for at least 15. The courtroom erupted in applause, highly unusual, but Judge Hawkins allowed it, saying, "Sometimes justice deserves recognition." Brittany had gotten 2 years probation and 3,000 hours of community service. She'd actually become a decent employee at McDonald's, even getting promoted to shift manager. Her Instagram now featured motivational quotes about redemption and pictures of her mopping floors with captions like "humble beginnings," character development at last. The family business had not just recovered, but thrived. The employees, freed from Frank's toxic management, had increased productivity by 40%. We'd won back contracts Frank had lost, gained new ones from the publicity, and I'd instituted profit sharing that made everyone invested in our success. My mother had sold the tainted family home and bought a smaller place near the beach. She'd started dating my father's old friend, Mitchell, the lawyer from Denver who'd kept the real Will safe. He was nothing like Frank. Quiet, kind, and he asked me for permission before proposing. I gave it gladly. The Victims Network had become a formal nonprofit, helping widows recognize and escape predatory relationships. Barbara from the book club was its president, and they'd already helped dozens of women. They'd named it the Simona Foundation, which made me cry every time I saw the letterhead. Agent Chen, Sarah, as I now called her, had become a friend. The Frank case had earned her a promotion and a teaching position at Quantico. She used his case as a textbook example of how greed and narcissism create their own downfall. Frank had become literally a cautionary tale. The documentary had aired to huge ratings. Uncle Ted had become a minor celebrity, giving talks about bystander intervention and the importance of helping family members in need. He donated all his speaking fees to domestic violence shelters and bought me a car with his video royalties, a beautiful blue Tesla with a license plate that read, "Pushed Back." But the best moment came when I visited Frank in prison, not for closure or forgiveness, but to deliver something. I handed him a single photograph, the Christmas dinner table, fully set, my seat prominently displayed, with its bronze plaque reading, "Simona's Throne." That seat, I told him, was never about hierarchy. It was about family recognizing family. You'll never understand that because you've never been family. You were just a parasite who mistook patience for weakness. He tried to respond, but I was already walking away. The guards later told me he'd stared at that photo for hours, finally understanding that his one push had cost him everything while giving me back everything he'd tried to steal. A year after that Christmas push, we gathered again for the holidays. The table was full, fuller than before, actually. Sarah Chen came, as did several women from the Victims Network who had nowhere else to go. Mitchell was there, nervously practicing his toast as my mother's new husband. Even Brittany had been invited, though she chose to volunteer at a homeless shelter instead, sending a genuinely heartfelt card. Grandmother, now 86 and sharper than ever, raised her glass for a toast. Last year, we learned that silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit. This year, we've learned that redemption is possible for those who seek it, and justice, while sometimes delayed, is worth fighting for. As everyone clinked glasses, I thought about my father's words. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance. The balance had been restored. Frank had pushed me down in front of 23 silent witnesses. He was now falling for 25 years in front of the entire world. And this time, nobody was silent about what he deserved. They say you should be careful who you push down. They might know how to get back up. But Frank learned a harder lesson. Be careful who you push down at Christmas dinner. They might have a dead father who planned for this exact moment, an FBI agent for a pretend mistress, and a grandmother who's been documenting your crimes while pretending to be confused about her iPhone. The price of one push, everything Frank had schemed for, stolen, and built on lies, came crashing down from a single moment of cruelty. He'd thought he was pushing down a weak stepdaughter. Instead, he'd pushed the first domino in his own destruction. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe. A new story is coming tomorrow.